Welcome to Parowan Cemetery, one of the most beautiful and historic pioneer burial grounds in Mormon country. Today, there are approximately 75 locally produced pioneer-era grave markers in existence that were fashioned from locally available stone by immigrant Yankee and European stone carvers. They provide an unparalleled collection of 19th century Mormon material culture. Also included is a tour of a few of the other interesting grave sites in Parowan's historic cemetery. Our tour begins as you face the cemetery on the east side of the Information Center, located just inside the rock wall. The center was built to honor lifetime residents Clifford and Ada Evans and donated by the Daniel Evans Family Trust. Please stop the tape and turn it on again at stop 1. The Mormon community of Parowan was established on January 13, 1851, by a hand-picked company of 168 people, 120 men in the prime of youth and vigor, 30 women over 14 years of age, and 18 children under 14 years. Having recently established homes or having just arrived in the Great Salt Lake Valley after traveling by wagon train across the American continent, these pioneers responded to the call of their prophet leader, Brigham Young, to help build Zion, their kingdom of God on earth. Traveling 250 miles south into Indian Territory, they established this strategic outpost from which much of the interior West was settled. Towns in what later became Utah, Arizona, Wyoming, Colorado, Nevada, and California were all settled by pioneers who had roots in this small Mormon community. 28-year-old James A. Little, captain of the 2nd Company of Pioneers and the first sheriff of Center Creek, Iron County, as Parowan was originally identified, was reportedly the first person to die in the settlement. He was not buried in this cemetery, however, as a burial ground had not yet been surveyed. Charles Hall, 1 year and 11-month-old son of Charles and Elizabeth Hall, was the first person to be buried in the cemetery. According to city cemetery records, young Charles died November 12, 1851, of inflammation. Charles is buried east of the William Robb family plot, which is at stop 7 on the tour. Bishop Herman D. Bayless was the first sexton of the Parowan Cemetery, and he and his wife Juliet are listed among the original pioneer group.
My name is Barbara Bayless Batt. I'm the great-granddaughter of Herman Daggett Bayless. I'd like to tell a few incidences in the life of my great-grandfather. He was among the last to leave Nauvoo, remaining there to help the widows and children across the river. He and his wife left Nauvoo in 1847. He had an experience where his life was miraculously spared. One night, as they were camping at Hahn's Mill, the mob overtook them. They went into the mill for protection. The mob then commenced to fire upon them. The saints in the mill defended themselves as best they could. A young man who was standing by him insisted on changing places with him because he felt that he was a better marksman. Just a few minutes after they traded places, the young man was shot and died soon after, thus saving Herman for his future mission. In the fall of 1850, he joined Apostle George A. Smith's company of pioneers and went to Parowan, arriving on January 13, 1851. He was a bishop for 25 years. He was a ship joiner by trade, and a carpenter, machinist, and was a sexton. Here are some of the items listed in his account book. 1 coffin, $3, for Starling G. Driggs. Driggs's services by sexton, $2. Digging grave, $2. Total $7. Later prices went up a little and totaled $7.50. Great-grandfather owned a sawmill which sawed some of the lumber for the tabernacle organ. The trees from which this organ were made grew in Parowan Canyon and Pine Valley. He was the main worker on the rock church. He wouldn't ever come home for his meals until the signal was given that it was all on the table, because he was so anxious to rush the building to completion. He lived just across the street south. He used to take Grandfather Herman with him. Young Herman would watch for his mother to wave a dish towel. Then they'd go eat their dinner and be back on the job in 20 minutes. In 1886, on account of persecution heaped upon the saints, he left his home and went to Bluff City, where some of his children were living, and remained there until his death, which occurred on the 5th of March, 1888.
During the last half of the 19th century, over 643 burials were recorded in Parowan. Most are found in the oldest sections, those directly in front of you and to your left. Like most early Mormon burial places, the cemetery was originally organized into family plots that were maintained by family members. They were often enclosed by fences and decorated with carefully nurtured bushes or trees and natural vegetation, while the grave itself was cleared, scraped, and mounded with rich red earth. Lifelong Parowan resident Barbara Burt recalls how as a young child her family spent Decoration Day, now known as Memorial Day, at the Parowan Cemetery.
My name is Barbara Benson Bird, and I've lived in Parowan all my life. As a child, on Decoration Day, we would go to the city cemetery. Lunches were packed, and we planned to spend the day cleaning off the weeds and carrying water to rose bushes that had been planted. To this day, there's still some of those rose bushes still growing in the cemetery. We had our lunch, lots of visiting with friends and relatives. It's such a quiet and peaceful place to spend some time.
During the 1960s, water was piped in to irrigate the cemetery, and ultimately the small fences and most of the bushes and other vegetation that separated family plots were all removed. Lawns were planted, and cemetery maintenance became the responsibility of the city. As the years went by, the cemetery expanded southward to the right, and most recently to the far left. By the end of the 20th century, it is estimated there will be about 2,200 burials in the Parowan Cemetery. In true Western tradition, Parowan's original cemetery fence was white picket, which surrounded the older 4 sections of the cemetery. Then, in the summer of 1938, the picket fence was replaced by the rock wall, which now surrounds the cemetery. This was a WPA project, providing employment for a number of residents during the Great Depression. The rock came from the Parowan Gap area. An arched entryway was also constructed. Interestingly, over the years, the arch was knocked down several times by the vault truck. After the last incident in the mid-1970s, the arch was not rebuilt until interest in and support for rebuilding the arch was realized in 1999. The new arch was built a little higher and stronger. Now you may turn off the tape and move to the section to the left where the big rock is located for stop 2. This is a good spot from which to see the variety of materials and styles used by some of Parowan's 19th century gravestone carvers. First, on the left side of the rock, notice 2 similar markers on the second row. Both are the work of Welsh stone carver John Perry, whose family immigrated to the area in the fall of 1856, along with his son-in-law, Elias Morris, also a stonemason, and the expert Brigham Young sent to Cedar City to assemble the ironworks located there. In 1863, Perry helped build the Old Rock Church and likely spent a lot of time carving gravestones, as today there are still approximately 50 markers attributed to him in the Parowan and Cedar City cemeteries. His gravestones were carved from a grayish sandstone, likely quarried at Cane Springs, 15 miles northwest of Parowan. They have a simple, symmetrical style, with linear accents that emphasize each marker's silhouette. The marker on the right memorializes English pioneer John Perkins, who died just shy of his 50th birthday, while the one on the left remembers Perkins' daughter, who died aged 3 years, 1 month. On the first row, a little to your left, is an upright sandstone marker with a simple curved top, marking the grave of 7 years, 11 months, 11 days old John Benson. The work of English gravestone carver Thomas Hugo Hickman. This marker is decorated with Hickman's characteristic oak leaves and acorns, and includes a partially buried, unreadable poetic epitaph that expresses the sadness and resignation of John's parents at his death. In the late 1850s, Hickman was among the earliest pioneers to Tokerville, a village 60 miles south of here. In the early 1870s, he moved his family to Parowan. The over 30 existing gravestones attributed to Hickman in the Parowan Cemetery suggest that carving gravestones was an important part of his livelihood. Walking left on that same row, 3 markers to the left, is a gravestone for Thomas Malcolm and Joanna Alberta Davenport, children of William and Annie Neal Davenport. This marker was carved after Joanna's death in 1881 by Nathan Benson, Parowan's longest resident pioneer gravestone carver. Benson and his family immigrated from England to Parowan in 1868.
My name is Barbara Benson Bird. I'm a granddaughter to Nathan Benson. He was a brick mason and owner of sawmills. He also ran the co-op store. He was a great mathematician and knew great lengths in adding addition of numbers in rows. For 30 years, his sons and grandsons operated the sawmill and the quarry in Parowan Canyon. He produced many products of local use, including gravestones. There are more existing markers attributed to Benson than to other pioneer carvers in southern Utah, and his work is easily recognized by its fine-grained sandstone and clearly incised lettering. Today, over 100 years later, many of the Benson descendants still live in Parowan.
Just to the left of the marker carved by Benson is another Davenport family stone, this one honoring another son, William N., who died in 1891 at age 25. Like many markers from the late 19th century, it was made of white marble and was most likely imported by rail from New England quarries, already carved, aside from the inscription. It features an image of a weeping willow, a popular symbol of mourning, and was hand-carved, like the earlier sandstone markers, using a wooden mallet and iron chisel. Although this particular marble marker was not signed by its maker, be sure to check along the base of other marble markers in the cemetery and look for the carver's name or that of his monument company. Turn off the tape and walk to stop 3, Watts Family Markers. Benjamin Watts and his wife Ellen were among the group of 168 people comprising the original band of pioneer settlers, and Benjamin was one of a half-dozen men who, a year after their arrival in the area, began traveling each day 5 miles north of Parowan to work in the fields planted along Red Creek. Before long, the men had built dugouts and were joined by their families, establishing the settlement of Paraguna. The name was an Indian word that referred to the area's swampy land and many springs. Although the modern-day spelling has dropped one of the 2 O's, Paraguna is still pronounced by locals with the double O's. The Watts were also among those who came back to Paraguna in 1856, after the fear of Indian raids had sent them to Parowan for protection. Upon their return, they helped build an adobe fort, which they lived inside of until they finished building their own cabin. Benjamin Watts also built a tannery that was powered with the sandstone wheel that is now found in front of the Paraguna LDS Ward House. Benjamin died in 1896, and his wife had his grave marked with this lovely marble stone, carved and signed by the Beasley Marble Works, a company that still works out of Provo, Utah, today. On this marker, the hand, representing the body, is holding a rose, representing love, and is pointing upward towards heaven. The funerary drapery on the top symbolizes the veil between heaven and earth. Balanced against this beautiful statement of belief in life after death is the anguished resignation conveyed by the poetic epitaph.
Gone from sorrow, grief, and anguish, gone no more with pain to languish. Gone my longing soul set free, oh, how hard to part with thee.
Ellen's marker features clasped hands, suggesting her reunion with her husband or reunion with God after death, and the parting epitaph written on her marker,
My weary limbs are now at rest. Suffering and pain with me are gone. I go to meet my friends whom God has blessed in heaven, where we shall part no more. Farewell, dear children. My life is past. You faithfully loved me to the last. Weep not for me, nor sorrow take, but love each other for my sake.
Notice the badly deteriorated marker to the right of these two stones and the contemporary plaque that indicates this was the grave of two of the Watts children, James Franklin and Nancy Alice, who died as infants in the early 1870s. Turn off the tape and walk to stop 4 steel family markers. Like many of Parowan's original settlers, who were first-hand participants in many of the most important chapters in early Utah history, 30-year-old Jonathan Steele, his 35-year-old wife, Catherine Campbell Steele, and their 11-year-old daughter, Mary Campbell Steele, made the journey across the plains, arriving in Parowan with the first group of pioneers in 1851. Natives of Ireland, they converted to Mormonism and traveled to Nauvoo, where they joined the saints headed westward. John, who volunteered for service in the Mormon battalion, was joined in that endeavor by his wife and daughter, who, serving as laundresses, were among only 34 women and 50 children who accompanied the 500-member battalion. It should be noted that there are a number of Mormon battalion men and women buried in the Parowan Cemetery, including the oldest Mormon battalion member, Samuel Gould, who is buried west of Zilpha Stark Smith's marker, whose gravesite is visited on this tour. The Steeles were also part of the battalion's sick detachment that spent the winter of 1846 and 47 in what became Pueblo, Colorado. As a result, they were among the group of battalion members who arrived in the valley of the Great Salt Lake only 5 days after Brigham Young's party. A few days after that, on August 9th, Catherine delivered a baby girl named Young Elizabeth, the first white baby born in Utah. A shoemaker by trade, John was a prominent figure in early Parowan. Over the years, he served as both marshal and mayor, was part of several major explorations of the region, negotiated with the Indians, and served on the mission to establish Las Vegas. John and Catherine's eldest daughter, Mary, married Joseph Fish, a Mormon convert from Canada. She married him at age 18 and died just days before her 34th birthday, after giving birth to their 6th child. Mary had suffered from ill health for years, exacerbated by the debate among local doctors about whether the best treatment was warming the patient until they perspired, using emetics to induce vomiting, or bleeding, a practice that theoretically drew blood away from the head. In his journal, her husband wrote,
My wife, Mary Campbell Fish, who's been sick for some time, died this morning. Her loss was a heavy blow to me. She was a loving wife and kind mother. She leaves 6 children and many friends to mourn her loss. She was 5 feet 2 inches tall, weighed about 120 pounds, and was rather heavy-set. She had very light brown hair, dark eyes, and a very white, transparent skin. She was of a sociable disposition, good company, quick-witted, very ambitious and high-minded, and an incessant worker. She despised anything low or mean, and her social spirit never failed to win friends wherever she was placed.
Mary's gravestone, as well as that of her youngest brother, Robert Henry Steele, John and Catherine's last child, are granite markers, fashioned in the style of the original sandstone markers they replaced. Their style suggests that the original markers were likely carved by John Perry. Notice that special medallions have been installed in front of the gravestones, memorializing both Mary and her mother Catherine, their service in the Mormon Battalion, and Jonathan's service in the Mormon Battalion and Mexican War. Also make note of the gold stickers on many markers in the cemetery. These were added by family members to honor their pioneer ancestors during the Mormon Church's sesquicentennial, or 150-year celebration, in 1997. Turn off the tape and walk to stop 5, the Dame family and Elijah Newman family markers. These two striking replacement stones, and the smaller one to their right, mark the graves of 3 more members of the original party of Parowan settlers. The smaller stone, carved by John Perry, is for Elijah Newman. About all we know about Newman was that he was 53 years old when he came to Parowan, and he had married his 26-year-old wife, Letha Jane Killian, in Salt Lake a few months before the trek. He evidently traveled ahead of his wife, since their first child was born and died in Salt Lake City. After she joined him in Parowan, they had 7 more children. At least 5 lived to maturity. Newman served on the first city council, and he died at the age of 77. The 2 large markers are for William and Lavinia Dame. Interestingly, one of Newman's children was named Lavinia Dame Newman, so perhaps the families were close friends, and that explains why they are buried side by side. Quite a lot is known about the Dames because William was a prominent civic, religious, and military leader. He served for 2 years as Parowan's first mayor, represented Iron County in the 1854 legislature, and then became Parowan stake president, as well as leader of the Iron Military District. These positions gave him religious and military jurisdiction over an area that took in all the Mormon settlements south of Fillmore. He held this jurisdiction during the Mountain Meadow Massacre, and as a result spent 15 months in the Beaver Jail during an investigation of the incident that failed to uncover anything to incriminate him. The Dames were Yankees, born in New Hampshire and Ohio, and he was 31 years of age, and she 20, when they arrived in Parowan. He helped survey both Parowan and Coal Creek, now called Cedar City, did carpenter work on the Parowan Rock Church, and was sent on 2 missions, one to England and the other to the settlement on the Muddy River that became Las Vegas. There he helped assist Mormons called back from their early settlement in San Bernardino because of church leaders' fear of federal troops approaching Salt Lake City.
I'm Hazel Jean Davenport Robinson, and the name of William H. Dame is a hallowed name in our family because of the fact that when Brother Dame was in England on a mission, he encouraged my grandmother, Rachel Pass, to come back to southern Utah with him as a means of the rest of the family following at a later time. He had 2 wives, but neither of them were able to have any children. And so they raised my grandmother from the time she came, which was 8 years of age, to the time she was married to James B. Davenport. They also thought a lot of Grandpa because they deeded property to him in Paraguna, and field property and property for a home. And we know that they thought a great deal of them. So we would probably be considered as near his next of kin as you could get.
Later, Dame was appointed president of the Parowan School of the Prophets, an organizer of PUMI, the Parowan United Mercantile and Manufacturing Association, and president of the Parowan United Order, all church-sponsored initiatives that contributed significantly to Parowan's early religious and economic development. In his role as religious leader, he is also remembered for encouraging the young people of the town to marry one another, and was responsible for a number of specific matches. Turn off the tape and walk to Stop 6, the Lyman family. These stones mark the graves of 2 members of Apostle Amasa Lyman's large polygamist family. Cornelia Eliza Levitt Lyman was the 7th of Lyman's 8 wives, while Oscar Morris Lyman was the oldest son of Paulina Eliza Phelps Lyman, his 5th wife. Amasa Lyman was a prominent leader in the development of the Southern Territory, and about the time Parowan was settled, he was called to establish a community in California that would help connect Mormon settlements with the coast. When troubles with the federal government forced Brigham Young to call back those settlers, Lyman resettled his families in several communities, with 2 of his wives making their homes in Parowan. Cornelia, who taught school in her home, died at age 39 and was the only one of Lyman's wives who predeceased him. The lovely marker he commissioned features clasped hands signifying belief in reunion after death, and lists their 2 sons who were born in San Bernardino and raised by Cornelia's sister wife, Paulina, after her death. 10 years after Cornelia's death, Tragedy struck the family when Paulina's oldest son, Oscar Morris, was killed, along with Frank Westbrook, in a boiler explosion at the sawmill up the canyon where they were making shingles. The shingle-making process involved sawing logs into blocks, peeling off the bark, splitting the wood with a grain into the right width, and then putting them into an 8 by 12-foot steam box for the night. The next morning, the wood would be cut into the right length for shingles. Oscar was the engineer who fired the boiler. Evidently, the boiler accidentally burned dry, and when the injector pumped in cold water, the boiler blew up. Oscar left behind a young wife and 2 baby sons. Turn off the tape and walk to stop 7, the Robb family. The first grave marker on the left side of this group is one carved by John Perry in 1864 for 19-year-old Ellen Matilda Anderson. The rest in the row belong to the Robb family from Scotland. William Robb, a coachmaker, his wife Helen, and their infant son James immigrated from Scotland to Australia in about 1838.
My name is Pat Robb Christiansen. I'm the great-great-granddaughter of William Robb. Shortly after their first son was born, William and Helen decided to take advantage of the government's offer of free land in Australia. They immigrated to Sydney, New South Wales, Australia, and William set up a coach building business, and Helen had a dish and household goods store. They joined the LDS Church in 1851 and then immigrated to America on the ship Lucas in 1857, along with 8 children and his second wife, Susanna Drummond. After living in Paragoona for a few years, William was called in 1861 to go to Harrisburg to raise cotton. He took Susanna, and Helen stayed in Paragoona with their 9 children. After Susanna's death, he returned to Paragoona with their 4 children. He lived in the Robb home with his daughter, Jane Jones, and her family until his death in 1897. His rock home in Harrisburg is one of 2 still standing on the hill of the RV park, visible from the freeway.
Like Ellen Matilda Anderson's marker, Caroline's was carved by John Perry of Cedar City. When William received the call to help settle the Dixie country to the south, his first wife, Helen, and their children stayed in Paragoona to look after the cattle herd, while William, Susanna, and their children moved to Harrisburg to raise cotton. They lived and prospered there for about 10 years. During that time, Susanna gave birth to 5 more children, 2 of whom survived infancy. When Susanna died in childbirth in 1873, William buried her in Harrisburg, along with her 3 babies, and returned to Paragoona with their 4 living children, where he spent the rest of his life. The next death in the Robb family was a daughter-in-law, Mary Comfort Dutton Robb, the 19-year-old wife of John Robb, Helen and William's 7th child. Mary was buried next to young Caroline Rebecca in a grave marker with a stone carved by Thomas Hickman. 4 years later, just a year after Susanna died and William returned to Paragoona, his first wife, Helen, passed away. William commissioned this 4-sided marble monument to mark her grave, a costly marker that was likely imported from the East Coast by rail to northern Utah, and then southwards by wagon. William lived another 23 years, undoubtedly enjoying his numerous children and grandchildren and taking care of his cattle. When he passed away in 1897, his children purchased this gray marble 4-sided monument to mark his grave. Turn off the tape and walk to stop 8, the Davenport family. Thomas and Sarah Burroughs Davenport and their 4 young children joined the Mormon Church in their native England in 1847 and arrived in Salt Lake City in October 1852.
My name is Hazel Jean Davenport Robinson. Thomas Davenport was my great-grandfather. He and his wife, Sarah Burroughs Davenport, they were immediately sent to Parowan, where his talents were needed to supply the settlers with tableware and crockery. After intense searching for the right kind of clay, Davenport found some 2 miles up the canyon to the right on the side of the hill. He built kilns, hauled the clay to town by wheelbarrow, and went into production. After much trial and error, he succeeded in producing crockery that was used for decades throughout this region. He was also one of 11 directors of the United Order and served as the city treasurer for many years. Thomas was gifted in a musical way, both as a singer and composer, which talent carried over into the lives of his family. He wrote a song called "Come All Ye Sons of God" that is in the LDS hymn book. He also wrote a kind of a novelty number called "Tommy Lad" that is sung and also spoken, and this has been used in the family for generations. He wrote other songs, but I can't tell you them.
Thomas reportedly liked to eat a whole mince pie for dinner, even if it did give him nightmares. When his wife Sarah died at age 70, he must have commissioned this marker from Thomas Hickman and instructed Hickman to also memorialize their sixth child, an infant son who was born and died in Parowan. Thomas Davenport's gravestone was carved by Nathan Benson, as was the gravestone carved for Davenport's grandchildren that was identified at the beginning of the tour. Turn off the tape and walk to stop 9, William Cook Mitchell, Sr. This sandstone grave marker was carved and signed by Elias Morris, the young stonemason and engineer sent by Brigham Young to set up the ironworks in Cedar City. Although later in Morris's career, he established a gravestone carving business in Salt Lake City that lasted for over a century and produced markers now found throughout the region. This marker, carved to memorialize the life and tragic death of William Cook Mitchell, Sr., is only one of a few existing stones carved by Morris's own hand. During his life, Englishman William Cook Mitchell, Sr. was a Protestant minister, a Mormon missionary, a fiddler, a singer, and a freighter who hauled yellow pine by wagon to sell to the Nevada mines. It was this last endeavor that took his life at the age of 51. One night as he drove a high-wheeled logging wagon down the canyon filled with an extra-large log, the wagon turned over as he crossed the bridge, and he was pinned down by the log. He died shortly after he was found.
My name is Carlo Mitchell. I'm a direct descendant of 3 William Cook Mitchells. The sketch I'm going to give you will indicate that they were all men of true integrity and character, and I'm proud of all 3 of them. The first 2 I didn't know personally because my grandfather Mitchell died when I was 3 years old. But I did live with number 3 for 52 years and found him probably the best man I ever knew. Now, with that kind of background, there's no way I could have any faults. Ha ha. William Cook Mitchell Sr. was born January 14, 1806 in Yorkshire, England, to Enoch and Mary Cook Mitchell. He had a religious inclination and began studying the Bible at an early age, but found no church that met his expectations. At the age of about 28, he moved with his wife and young daughter to Liverpool on the west coast, where he made his living as a mariner and a whale hunter. His son William Jr. was born there, and when the boy was 5 years old, his parents were introduced to the restored church by John Taylor and Joseph Fielding, LDS missionaries. After the Mitchells' conversion and baptism, their home became a sort of an ad hoc missionary headquarters for the area. William was soon called on a mission to the Isle of Man with John Taylor. Within a year, obedient to the counsel to gather to Zion, the Mitchells left all that was dear and sailed with the Joseph Fielding Company to America. They were in winter quarters in the terrible winter of 1846, and with so many other saints suffered from cold and became terribly ill. Just as William was beginning to feel better but still needing a cane to aid in his walking, he was called to serve a mission in the British Isles. Because of the physical conditions of the family, his wife Eliza was still bedridden. He was obliged to take his 11-year-old son, William Jr., with him, leaving Eliza, his 16-year-old daughter, to care for the mother. Can you imagine the trauma of such a parting and the faith required to accept the call? Upon arriving in England, William learned that his beloved wife Eliza had died and the daughter had gone back to the eastern seaboard to live with friends. William never saw her again. What a terrible time of heartbreak for the new missionaries, but what wonderful experience for the 11-year-old son to live so intimately with a father who loved him so and to be immersed so totally in the marvelous and exciting work of the restoration.
Mitchell, his second wife Louisa Moore, who was also from England, and William Jr., a teenage son from his first marriage, were among the original group of Parowan settlers. A year after their arrival in Parowan, Mitchell returned to Salt Lake City and brought back his polygamist wife, Mary Ann Moore, Louisa's older sister. While living in Parowan, Louisa gave birth to 3 boys, all of whom died in infancy. Although William didn't live to see his and Louisa's daughter Mary, who was born 6 months after his accident, he had been able to spend some time with the children of his second wife, Mary Ann, whose 4 young children were all under the age of 8 at the time of his death. Turn off the tape and walk to stop 10, William Cook Mitchell Jr. family. Living through the founding years of Parowan as a teenager, William Cook Mitchell Jr.'s experience was somewhat different from that of the older generation. His name is associated with reminiscences of young people courting on the square, holding parties at Rush Lake, having sleigh races in the winter, and singing, dancing, and picnicking in the canyon during the summer. Carl O. Mitchell, a grandson of William Jr., retells us about one of the pranks William Jr. and his friends pulled on a neighbor.
He was also a participant in a schoolboy Halloween prank that involved dismantling the neighbor's wagon, putting it back together on top of his barn, and then serenading the neighbor and receiving thanks for not being like those naughty boys who had moved the wagon. But the hard work of making a living was also a part of William Jr.'s experience. He chopped railroad ties in the mountains and freighted wood, oats, and potatoes to the Nevada mines. He said that with 2 good teams of horses and a sturdy wagon, he felt like he was a real cog in the local commerce until the railroad came. Even in the winter weather that was so cold he had to walk to keep from freezing, he still hauled produce to Nevada. Ultimately, he became a prosperous rancher, a member of the choir, which sang for the General Conference in Salt Lake City and gained the plaudits of William Tecumseh's sermon. He was a bishop and a church leader, one of the 11 elected members of the United Order. He also served both as mayor and city council member.
William Jr. married 4 wives in Parowan, the first born in England as he was, the second from Sweden, and the third and fourth sisters, the daughters of his Parowan neighbors Edward Dalton and Elizabeth Meeks Dalton. All his wives preceded him in death, except the youngest, Sarah Sidney Dalton, and all are listed on the sides of this 4-sided monument erected over his grave in the middle of this group of markers. Interestingly, William's first and last wives are listed on the front with him, while the second and third wives are listed on the back with 2 infants on the side. Presumably his youngest wife was the one who made this decision. Mitchell's first wife, Mary Ann Holmes, died at the age of 37. Her marker, just to the right of his, was carved by John Perry. The next wife to die was his second wife, Augusta, who died at age 35. Her marker, carved by Nathan Benson, was placed to the left of Mary Ann's, leaving a space in between for William to be buried. A few years later, his third wife, Huldah, died just before her 37th birthday. She was buried to the left of Augusta, and her grave was also marked by a Nathan Benson marker. The earliest grave in this family group belongs to daughter Eliza Ann, who died in infancy in 1858. Located on the far right, her marker, like her mother Mary Ann's, was carved by John Perry. The grave of another child, Joseph Mitchell, is to the right of Mary Ann's grave, and is only marked with a mortuary marker, a reminder that there are likely many burials in the cemetery which were not permanently marked. Joseph was the 6th son of Augusta and William, and he died in 1889, 7 years after his mother died during his birth. Between his and little Eliza's graves, you will find the sandblasted granite marker that indicates where Mitchell's 4th wife, Sarah Sidney Dalton, was buried at age 75, 14 years after his death at age 76. Turn off the tape and walk to stop 11, David Lewis marker. David Lewis was the younger brother of Bishop Tarleton Lewis, who served in Nauvoo and Salt Lake before being sent to Parowan to fill that same calling. The Lewis family was prominent in early Mormon history, having been present at many important events, including the raid at Hans Mill, where their oldest brother Benjamin was killed, and at which Tarleton picked up a bullet that he carried with him for the rest of his life. David appears to have joined his brother in Parowan in company of his second wife, Elizabeth Carson, while his first wife, Doretha Trail, remained in Salt Lake City to raise their 7 children, ranging in age from 4 to 17. But his time with this second family was cut short, as he died of paralytic stroke at age 41, leaving behind a young wife and 2 toddlers. Lewis's grave marker is reportedly carved from Cane Springs sandstone by John Price, a stone cutter from Tennessee who was called to the Iron Mission in 1857, 2 years after David's death. If you look left, out across the valley, you will see a thin dirt road leading up into the mountains where Cane Springs is located. It appears that the marker was commissioned a few years after Lewis's death, something that likely happened quite frequently in pioneer times, as it does today. Turn off the tape and walk to stop 12, Barton and Orton family markers. According to the inscription, this tall granite marker was erected in 1994 by the Johnson branch of the Almira Johnson Smith Barton's family. Fashioned in the vertical style of the sandstone marker it replaced, it features lilies, a traditional symbol of rebirth, and memorializes the life of a woman who was one of the first polygamist wives of Mormon prophet and founder Joseph Smith. When polygamy was first started in the Mormon Church, it was not well received. Finally, several women agreed to be Joseph Smith's plural wives, including Almira. After Smith's martyrdom, numerous other single women were sealed to Joseph Smith so that they would have an eternal partner in the afterlife. Almira then married Reuben Barton, traveled west, and ultimately made her home in Parowan. Next to Almira Barton's gravestone is a rather plain sandstone marker marking the grave of one of her daughters, Dellie S. Barton. Presumably, 20-year-old Dellie S. is the same daughter listed as Sarah Delsina on her mother's gravestone. Sarah Delsina was among the group of girls that worked as telegraph operators in the Dame home, where Parowan's first telegraph office was located. Besides the discrepancy in names, it is also curious that this marker identifies Dellie's mother, but not her father. And perhaps most unusual is the fact that this is the only gravestone carved by T.H. Hickman that he took time to sign. If you care to see the signature, please stop the tape and look at the bottom right-hand side along the grass line. But according to local legend, Dellie was sealed to the prophet Joseph Smith, suggesting that Mrs. Barton's status as one of Joseph Smith's wives and Dellie's as one of his children likely had great importance in pioneer Parowan. Moving to the right, the next few gravestones on this row tell part of a very sad and all too common tale of pioneer-era sickness and death. The first marker you'll see has exquisitely carved ferns and the words, Charlie's Grave. This marker, as well as one carved for Charlie's younger brother, Osmond T., located in another section of the cemetery, are among the most beautiful 19th century gravestones found anywhere in Utah. Although Charlie's marker provides great contrast to the simplicity of Dellie Barton's marker, it was undoubtedly carved by the same hand. As you wander through the cemetery, you can confirm this through the many Hickman markers that feature a smaller version of the ferns at their base. To the right of Charlie's grave are 2 sandstone markers erected in memory of Julia Anna Orton and Hannah Taylor Orton, the first wife and the mother of English pioneer Samuel T. Orton. Samuel came to Utah with his parents, William and Hannah, and 5 siblings. The family settled in Parowan in the late 1850s. Samuel freighted goods with William C. Mitchell, Jr., and farmed the area around Summit. When he was about 32 years old, he married 14-year-old Julia Anna, a daughter of Joel Johnson, whose family watched over the livestock corralled southwest of Summit at Johnson Spring, or Enoch as it is known today.
My name is Carrie Ward Shirtloff, and I'm not a relative of the Ortons, but I would like to tell their story. This is perhaps one of the saddest stories about people in our cemetery. This is the story of Julia Anna Orton and her family. Her husband was Samuel T. Orton. Samuel came to Utah with his parents, William and Hannah, and 5 siblings. This family settled in Parowan in the late 1850s. When he was 32 years old, he married 14-year-old Julia Anna, a daughter of Joel Johnson. During the next 2 decades, Julia gave birth to 12 children, losing 2 as infants and 1 at age 4. Then in April of 1879, at the age of 32, she died along with her 12th baby during childbirth. Poor Samuel was left with 8 children to raise, but the sorrow didn't end here, as 4 more children died during a scarlet fever epidemic within months of their mother. 4- and 5-year-olds Seth and Hannah in July, and then in August, 19-month-old Osmond, followed quickly by 10-year-old Charlie. I think that perhaps the reason that carver Thomas Hickman produced such beautiful markers for these 2 little boys is because of the tragedy that this family had endured. Such a sad, sad thing. There was one bright spot in this story. 2 years before Julia's death, Samuel had married her half-sister, Esther Ellis Johnson, and she undoubtedly became a very good mother to Julia's 4 remaining children.
Julia Anna's great-great-granddaughter, Beverly Taylor, reads a poem written and read by Julia Anna's father at her funeral.
Dear sister, thou hast gone to rest. We will not weep for thee, for thou art now among the blessed where thou hast long desired to be. Thou couldst no longer with us stay, although in youthful bloom thy kindred beckons thee away to share a better home. Yes, sister, while we miss thee, thy toils and cares are over. From sorrow, pain, and suffering, thou art safe forevermore. We know thy spirit now is free, thy sins are all forgiven. The saints in glory welcome thee to share the bliss of heaven. Thou wasn't to all a faithful friend, with love thou didst greet them. And when we reach the journey's end, we hope our friend to meet, and share with them eternal life and crowns of glory too. And when that happy day arrives, we shall all be there with you.
Turn off the tape and move to stop 13, the Smith and Wimmer markers. These 2 markers tell another common pioneer-era story, that of a polygamous wife and her children making their own way and living out their lives without spending much time with their husband and father. On the right is a marker memorializing Zilpha Stark Smith, 4th wife of Apostle George Albert Smith, the leader of Parowan's initial settlers, and the apostle who presided over the settlement of much of what became southern Utah. George and Zilpha arrived in Parowan at the ages of 34 and 33 respectively, having buried a daughter in Nauvoo and a son in Salt Lake City. The rest of George's living wives remained in Salt Lake City until one made her home in Provo a few years later. As the mother of the settlement, Zilpha must have been a well-respected member of the community.
Hello, I'm Beverly Taylor, and I'm a great-great-granddaughter of Zilpha Stark Smith, who came to Parowan with George A. Smith on January the 13th, 1851. And their only child that lived was born after she came to Parowan, and that was Mary Amelia Smith. And she was the only one of their children that lived. The rest are buried along the trail and in Salt Lake City. And as Grandpa Smith would travel back and forth from Salt Lake to St. George with different dignitaries of the church, he would always have them stop for the night in Parowan and stay at Grandma's house. On December the 31st, they were at Fillmore. And the members of the party, the camp, decided they wanted to have a New Year's Eve party, and Brother George A. told him that would be fine if he could find someone to prepare it. And of course he found Zilpha and the wives of John D. Lee. And they started a big fire, and they cooked it said, a very, very delicious dinner. It doesn't tell us what they had, but they had a very delicious dinner. And in the process, there was a foot of snow that was on the ground, and it hadn't melted a bit because it was so cold. And the ice had frozen up their long skirts where they had walked through the snow to prepare this meal, about 10 inches from the bottom. And then where all the party had walked and gathered around the campfire and all, they had melted the snow, and they were just walking in mud up to their ankles.
The marker on the left is for two of Zilpha's grandsons, Peter Albert Wimmer and John Henry Wimmer, both of whom died in their second year. They were the oldest sons of Zilpha's daughter, Mary Amelia, and her husband, stonemason Peter Wimmer. Their gravestone, carved by Thomas Hickman, features lovely columbines and clasped hands, a symbol signifying reunion after death. Zilpha's beautiful sandstone monument was also carved by Thomas Hickman and is decorated with ivy, representing rebirth, and with oak leaves and acorns, symbolizing the strength she undoubtedly had. Zilpha died 3 years after her husband, who died before 5 of his 7 wives. Turn off the tape and move to stop 14, Edward Meeks Dalton marker. Edward Meeks Dalton, the son of Edward Dalton and Mary Elizabeth Meeks, was born in Parowan the year after the first settlers arrived. His father, Edward Sr., was a veteran of the Mormon Battalion who served in many high church and civic positions, and his mother, Mary Elizabeth Meeks, was the daughter of Pretty Meeks, a well-known doctor who lived and practiced in several Utah outposts during the 19th century.
My name is Shirley Dalton Mercer, and I'm one of Edward Meeks Dalton's grandchildren. My grandfather, Edward Meeks Dalton, was born August the 20th, 1852, here in Parowan. He was very popular with the young and the old. He had a winning personality, and he loved to sing and play the guitar, and crowds of young people gathered around him. He married my grandmother when he was 19 years old. Then later he took another wife, Delilah. From 1872 till 1882, 4 boys were born to Edward and Emily, and a child or 2 was born to Delilah. Grandfather went to conference in Salt Lake in 1882, and while there he was called to fill a mission to the southern states. The family had to sacrifice with 2 wives and 6 children to support, but they were all faithful members of the church, and with the support of the family, they did the best they could. On grandfather's return, he was told that he had to leave one of his wives, or he would be under indictment for unlawful cohabitation. He refused to do this, not wanting to leave either one of his wives. So he was hunted by the law officers, and several times he made his escape just in time. And then he went to Arizona and worked for the mail service, trying to send money home to his family. It was December the 8th, 1886, when he arrived home, knowing that winter was coming on and he wanted to come and take care of his family. He was barely with his family 1 week when he was murdered, killed in cold blood with a bullet to the back. He was riding to the field with his herd of cattle and was shot by a deputy who lay in wait for him. The whole town was up in arms over this dastardly act, but Apostle Heber J. Grant sent word that the townspeople shouldn't take the law into their own hands, as one wrong didn't justify committing another. The whole town grieved the loss of this man who had been loved by all in the community. His family was devastated and in total shock and disbelief, a loss which caused so much hardship for the widows and fatherless children. After my grandfather's death, my grandmother went every day to the cemetery, and she seemed to receive comfort by going there. And then she wanted to plant flower. She planted a lilac bush, but being so dry, she had to go every day with a little bucket of water, walked from home, and kept this lilac bush alive. And then later on, when the headstone was mutilated by vandals in the cemetery, her heart was broken over that, and my father tried to mend the headstone in several different ways, but it never did hold, so that's why the top of the headstone is missing at this time.
Edward Meeks Dalton died at the age of 34 years, 3 months, and 21 days, and was reportedly the only person who ever lost his life for practicing polygamy. His final resting place is marked with this impressive four-sided marble marker, produced and signed by Brown's Marble Works in Salt Lake City, said to have been paid for with pennies donated by children throughout the territory. The simplicity and strength of the brief factual statement on the sides of the marker conveys the outrage people felt at Dalton's death.
Here lies the victim of a nation's blunder, which many to untimely graves hath brought. It nature's holy ties hath torn asunder, and untold suffering, woe, and anguish wrought. By ruthless hand this man crossed death's dark river. He was the sacred blood of innocence. The taker of his life will meeting the giver before the tribune of omnipotence. He was shot in the back and killed December 16, 1886, in cold blood by a deputy United States Marshal, while under indictment for a misdemeanor under the Edmunds anti-polygamy law.
While the scripture and the verses on the back lament and decry his loss. His 2 wives are buried to his right, Emily, who lived to the age of 88, and Helen, who lived to age 73. Turn off the tape and walk to stop 15, the Gurr family markers. For the most part, the story of Utah's settlement is a story of pioneers being sent from Salt Lake City to help build up the outlying settlements. But in fact, not everyone came that way. Some joined the pioneer communities arriving from the south, traveling by ship to San Bernardino, and then by wagon past the fort that became Las Vegas into the communities of southern Utah and Nevada. This is the journey taken by the Gurr family of Australia, who, like the Robb family, had immigrated from England a few years before and were converted to Mormonism by missionaries in Australia. They were among a group of 100 Mormon converts who traveled a perilous, accident-filled journey by sea to reach America and Zion.
I am Kendall Oliphant Gurr, the son of Peter H. Gurr, who is the son of William Heber Gurr, who is the son of William Gurr, who was born in England. And William Gurr cast off from England with his father, Enoch Eldridge, and mother in 1838, heading for Australia. On the journey from England to Australia, William's mother died and was buried at sea. Landing in Sydney, Australia, William received a stepmother who was Ruth Buckman. And here, after some time, they met the LDS missionaries and were converted with quite a few other people. And so then they decided that they must come to America and join with the rest of the saints. And so they journeyed on the ship Lucas. The journey was not too uneventful. There was one time there was days and days of calm, and of course this was a sailing ship, and when it was calm they just sat there. They said the ocean was as smooth as a mirror, and so the captain despaired because it was taking time that they should be making miles on the ocean. So the saints finally got together and they fasted and prayed, and almost immediately a wind come up, a nice favorable wind that got them going on their way again. And then later violent storms come up, and the captain had told everyone that it looked like we will be sunk. The ship was going from side to side. They had stricken the sails, and he had told them that this would be the end of the Lucas. So the saints got together again and they prayed, and almost instantly the storm stopped. And the captain says, "Oh," he says, "I will pit my fortune with you saints anytime." And then eventually they landed at San Pedro. But before they left Australia, William had married. He had married Sarah Elizabeth Barker, and they traveled, his husband and wife, on the ship. After landing at San Pedro, then the group advanced to San Bernardino, where they were outfitted by other saints, and then in the heat of the summer they crossed the deserts and come on to Parowan. And William and Sarah made their home in Parowan and raised their family here.
2 of William and Sarah's 9 children died before reaching maturity, 2-year-old James Edward and 17-year-old Enoch Alonzo. This four-sided marker memorializes them. Sarah died in 1902 at the age of 65, and William commissioned this beautiful white marker, hand-carved by James Boiter from Beaver. 11 years later, when he died, his family commissioned another marble marker from the same family-owned monument company, this one carved and signed by James's father, H.K. Boiter. Turn off the tape and walk to stop 16, Mary Harrison Rogerson. Many of the pioneers buried here in the cemetery crossed the plains either by wagon trail or with a handcart company. Those who could not afford to travel by wagon built handcarts to carry their possessions across the plains to new homes. Mary Harrison Rogerson, with her 6 children, arrived in Nauvoo from England, only to send her crippled son back to England to stay with his father when it was determined that they must cross the plains by handcart. The Rogerson family, like several other families, arrived after many of the handcart companies had already set out. They joined what was to become known as the ill-fated Martin Handcart Company. Unfortunately, they were not able to leave as quickly as they had hoped, and many in this group perished along the route from winter storms.
I am Hazel Jean Davenport Robinson. Mary Harrison Rogerson, who was my great-grandmother, was one of the first members of the church baptized in Preston, England in 1837. She came with her 5 children with the Martin Handcart Company. This company left late in the year and had quite intolerable conditions as they reached the tops of the mountains. Snowbound, many perished. They had to be rescued by wagon train. Many lost limbs through this experience. This was often called the Martin Ill-Fated Handcart Company. We credit the arrival of Mary and her 5 children safely to Salt Lake after this experience with the fact that she had traded valuable personal articles at Fort Laramie for jerky and hot pepper. And we figure that it was because of this hot pepper soup that she was able to make that actually saved their lives and those of other people. The story of her daughter's braids being frozen to the ground is one of the family favorite stories. One evening, the snow drifted under the tent flaps, and it froze the daughter, Sarah Ann's, braids to the ground, and when she tried to get up in the morning, she couldn't raise her head. So her brother Josiah had to take his pocket knife and cut off the braids and leave them lying in the snow.
Stop the tape and walk to stop 17, Osmond T.'s headstone. Earlier in the tour, we talked about the Orton family, who lost their mother and 5 children in a period of 5 months. No one is sure why 19-month-old Osmond is buried away from his family. Osmond's grave is probably the most simplistic and beautiful of all the late 19th century hand-carved sandstone markers. The marker was carved by Thomas Hickman and features his artistic carvings of ferns growing out of a pot and encircling the front of the marker. Stop the tape and walk to stop 18, Hanks family. 16-year-old Elizabeth Edwards married 32-year-old George William Hanks in Paragouna in the summer of 1865. As was the local custom, the ceremony was followed by a reception, a big dinner, and then a dance. They spent the night in the little adobe house George had outfitted for them and were awakened at dawn by Thomas Durham's brass band from Parowan, who played to welcome them into married life. The two had met each other the year before on the trail across the plains. Like many young men during that time, George had left Utah and traveled east to join with a group of saints to assist them in their migration west. He and his widowed mother arrived in Parowan 5 years earlier after having immigrated from England to Australia years before. In Australia, they became Mormons, traveled to California, and lived in San Bernardino until Brigham Young called all Mormons to Utah after the Mountain Meadows Massacre. Elizabeth, who along with her family had converted to Mormonism in her native Wales, traveled to Utah Territory with her widowed mother and 4 siblings. Another member of that same pioneer company was William Davenport, son of Thomas Davenport, the local potter, who also settled in Parowan. Elizabeth, or Eliza, was known for her beautiful voice and her love of singing, while William was known for making fine leather goods, shoes, saddles, belts, bridles, and boots. They were both devoted to their 8 children and to their 2 widowed mothers. In 1880, their infant daughter, Mary Alice, died at 2 months of age and was buried here. 4 years later, William's mother, Elizabeth Hanks Gribble, passed away after years of bad health. Then their 4-year-old son, Joseph Hiram, died of diphtheria in 1888. And just a year after that, William died, at age 56, of Bright's disease, after having suffered for several years. Their oldest daughter, Elizabeth Jane, the wife of Benjamin Hoyle, died in childbirth at the age of 26, and was buried along with her infant daughter, Mary Bell, leaving Eliza, who was then tending her own elderly and sick mother, with a young grandson to raise. Through all of this infirmity and death, Eliza persevered, living to the age of 80. Though she was a widow for 40 years, she never remarried, although given the chance several times, because she had promised her husband William on his deathbed that she would never remarry since she loved him more than her own life. Turn off the tape and walk to stop 19, Thomas Smith Family Markers. To the right of the 3 beautiful Benson carved headstones and footstones for Phoebe Key, Susan Fish, and Patience Key Smith is the gravestone of Thomas Price Smith, their husband. These 3 identical markers were likely commissioned by Thomas after the death of his 3rd wife, Patience. Thomas lived to the age of 90, passing away in 1896, 3 years after the death of his last wife. In their similarity, the markers suggest that Thomas had equal love for all 3 wives, yet this beautiful family plot only hints at the extent of his family. In fact, these 3 wives were his last 3 wives, and were preceded by 3 before them, who died and were buried in other towns. Although his 4th wife, Patience, buried here, had no children, his 3rd wife, Sarah, bore 12 children before she died, and was buried in Summit. Sometime during the middle of Sarah's childbearing years, Thomas was called on a mission to England. It's not clear where or when he married Phoebe, also buried here, although she, like her sister Patience, had no children. Records also indicate that Thomas married Patience when she was 64 years old, and since Phoebe is listed as his last wife, perhaps he also married her when she was older, a practice likely aimed at making sure that all of Mormon women who wanted a temple marriage were sealed to a husband for eternity. Stop the tape and walk to stop 20, Zachariah Decker marker. Zachariah B. Decker was typical of many of the early men buried in the Parowan Cemetery. You have probably noticed the military inscriptions on many of the headstones as you have toured through the cemetery. Not only were these people pioneers, but also patriots. Zachariah served in the Mormon Battalion, Mexican War, and Indian Wars. Zachariah also came to Parowan with the first group of pioneers in 1851.
I'm Steve Decker. I'm the great-grandson of Zachariah Bruin and Nancy Bean Decker. Zachariah was a Mormon Battalion member, and he came to California with the Mormon Battalion. There's an interesting story behind that. There are probably two versions of when he joined the LDS Church. The one that at least I subscribe to is that he was in Nauvoo at the time of some turmoil there, and when the Mormons were driven from Nauvoo, he went with them. As they came west sometime later, and the call came for the Mormon Battalion, he offered to join. He volunteered, but he was not a member of the church. He was coming with a friend of his named Lafayette Shepherd, who settled finally in Beaver, and he could not be a member of the Mormon Battalion without being a member of the LDS Church. And so Lafayette baptized him, made sure that he was a member, and he came with the Mormon Battalion and was in or near Sutter's Mill when gold was discovered there. The winter of 1850 and 51, he came to Parowan. He was in the first group of settlers that came to Parowan. He worked here as a constable for some time, and then answered a call to go to the San Juan country. He didn't stay there a long time. He returned back to Parowan. He lived the rest of his life here, died and is buried here in the Parowan City Cemetery, and raised his family here. The family scattered throughout the western states, but he remained here the rest of his life after returning from the San Juan country. Zachariah married Nancy Bean. He was her third marriage. The first marriage ended poorly in divorce, and it produced two children. Those children did not originally come west with Nancy, but stayed in the east, and later at least one of them followed her home here to Utah. The second marriage was to John D. Lee. That also ended somewhat miserably in divorce. Zachariah then met Nancy, and they were married. Zachariah and Nancy never did live the law of plural marriage, part of the reasons being the poor marriages that Nancy had had prior to marrying Zachariah, and they were somewhat reluctant to enter into that covenant. Zachariah did finally consent to enter the law of plural marriage. He heeded the call of his bishop to approach a particular woman here in Parowan, and her name was Mrs. McGregor, I believe. On the appointed day and at the appointed time, he went and he asked for her hand in marriage. She declined his offer, and he could be heard all over town yelling, "She turned me down." He was elated.
We will now tour through the newer section of the cemetery and visit the grave sites of some of Parowan's most prominent and in some cases more colorful former residents. Stop the tape and walk to stop 21, Orion Oni Webb. Throughout the years, Parowan has had a number of colorful residents whose practical jokes and unique personalities have been retold numerous times to the next generations. Orion Oni Webb is one such fellow. Even though his leg was bitten by a black widow spider and he had to have it amputated, this did not stop Oni from riding his horse or herding sheep. With no modern prosthesis available, he acquired a wooden leg that he would strap on to his amputated leg. Some of the older residents can recall when Oni would ride up and down Main Street waving his wooden leg to frighten young children and visitors to town. Or when they passed by the town bar, Oni would call out to them, "I bet you can't do this and be as tough as I am," after which he would stick his knife in his wooden leg and laugh. Stop the tape and walk to stop 22, Daniel Parker's marker. No southern Utah cemetery would be complete without an outlaw or two buried in it. Parowan is no exception. Daniel Parker was the youngest brother of famous outlaw Robert Parker, known as Butch Cassidy. Daniel had aspirations to be a member of Butch's gang, but Butch didn't want Dan involved in his criminal activities. Despite Butch's warnings, Dan went along on a robbery and was arrested. Dan was given an early pardon as a Christmas present by the governor, who had drawn Dan's name out in a chance drawing. Story by Carl O. Mitchell.
Dan Parker, the brother of Butch Cassidy. He is a native of Parowan, and the story goes that he, in an escape getaway, he got tangled up with the rope and around the horn of the saddle, which pulled his thumb off. And people used to ask him how he got his thumb took off. He'd say, by butting into other people's business, just like you are doing now.
Although Dan was a real Western character and raised a large family in Parowan, he never did realize his dream of becoming a big-time outlaw. Turn off the tape and walk to stop 23, Alma Richards. Alma Richards, born in Parowan, grew up running through the fields of Parowan. He became an athletic hero when he won Utah's first gold medal in the high jump at the 1912 Olympic Games in Stockholm, Sweden.
My name is Carrie Ward Shurtleff, and I want to talk today a little bit about one of the famous people that came from Parowan. Parowan has had a lot of wonderful people, and one of the most exciting stories about people from Parowan concerns Alma Richards, who was the first Utahn to win a gold medal in the Olympics, and he won it in 1912 at the Olympic Games in Stockholm, Sweden. But let me just read a paragraph from Lee Benson's book, Trials and Triumphs of Mormons in the Olympic Games. The grave sits on a bluff overlooking the town. To all outward appearances, it is indistinguishable from the graves around it, another testament to a person's life. But beyond that, it is a testament that even if you are the strongest, the fastest, the biggest, and the quickest, even if your athleticism did take you all over the world, where you taught kings to say Parowan correctly, not Parowan, even if Jim Thorpe himself was thankful you were a late bloomer, still, in the end, the best finish is also where you started. It was his last request, to be buried in his hometown in Parowan, Utah. They held a funeral in Orange, California, where he lived the better part of his life, where he was a one-man gang for the Los Angeles Athletic Club, where he got his law degree, where he taught school, where he retired. But they buried him in Parowan, Utah, not far from the fields where he chased the rabbits that kept him humble and first got him in shape. Say this about Alma Wilfred Richards: he never forgot where he came from. The story is told that when he was up for the last event in the Olympics in 1912, there were 22,000 people in the audience. The King of Sweden was there. He walked up to the bar, and then he took off his hat and walked over to the edge of the field and knelt down and prayed. He told this interviewer later that this was the prayer that he said: God, give me strength, and if it's right that I should win, give me strength to do my best to set a good example all the days of my life. He got up, put his cap on, and returned to the runway and won the gold medal. What an example for our young people. We do have heroes.
Turn off the tape and walk to stop 24, Governor Scott M. Matheson's marker. Scott M. Matheson, a descendant and relative to many of the Mathesons buried here in the Parowan Cemetery.
My name is Carol Adams Wright, and I'm an aunt to Scott Matheson. His roots were in Parowan. He was born in Chicago, where his father was studying law. But his father and mother were both born in Parowan. He had a great heritage and enjoyed that with all his life. It was his request that he be buried down here. He was a hard-working, honest person. He worked for his uncles and his grandfather on the farm and got a lot of exercise working hard. His education was the University of Utah, later Stanford University, where he got a law degree. Came back to Utah, worked for the Union Pacific, and was in law for several years. When he was asked to run for governor on the Democratic ticket, He shocked me because we knew a Democrat couldn't win in Utah. But he campaigned and won, and with his good wife Norma, they were great in the governorship, I think. And he loved his family, and he was great in sports. He was always active. It was said of him that he had all the traits that have come to symbolize the rugged frontier spirit of the West. He was courageous, proud, hardworking, and he was not afraid to take on the federal system when it was in Utah's best interest.
In 1990, Utah and the nation lost a fine statesman when Scott died at an early age from cancer. This now concludes your tour. The Parowan Cemetery is filled with beautiful grave markers that only hint at the fascinating stories behind the people whom they memorialize. We hope that this glimpse into the lives of some of Parowan's earlier residents will provide insight into life in this frontier community and to the kind of people who were central to the settlement of this region. There are many other wonderful stories about the interesting and well-known people who were buried here in Parowan. Don't neglect to use Parowan's cemetery brochure to guide you to the grave sites of other people. Take some time to explore the newer sections of the cemetery, or just wander through and get the feeling for things that matter most to Parowan's residents, the beliefs, the activities that help to define our community. Thank you for visiting our beautiful cemetery, and we hope you will enjoy your stay. This audio walking tour of Parowan's historic cemetery was a production of the Parowan Main Street program and was made possible by a matching grant from the Utah Humanities Council. For Parowan Main Street program, producers Leilani Bentley and Nancy Dalton. Director Jerry Bixman. Script was written by folk arts researcher Carol Edison. Post-production was done by Magic Key Productions, Red Rock Records, and Studio 7. And I'm your narrator, Jay Wilkin.
The pioneer music included in this production came from the Parowan manuscript and was performed by the Beehive Band from the album titled Hymns, Songs, and Fiddle Tunes of the Utah Pioneers.